I've made a few videos today, and I was thinking a little bit about the modality of video, and I'm kind of liking it because it's a way to have conversation, and I'm having conversation at this point just with myself, and it could be several months before I put this on anything where another person can listen to what I'm saying. Or I might never do it. I'm not sure. But even in playing back some of the videos to myself and listening to what I was saying, and I don't plan on exactly what I'm going to say. I have a general idea of something that I want to elaborate on. But by listening to myself speak, I realized that it's almost a way to have a conversation with myself. So I had that conversation with the video camera, and it was sort of, it came out of nowhere in a way, and then I listened to it after, and it's almost like hearing the conversation for the first time. And so I'm actually, in a way, benefiting from listening to my own video because I'm listening to how I decided to speak what it was that I wanted to elaborate on. And some of the things that I say are new in my mind, whereas some of them I already thought of before. So I like that aspect. It's almost like having that as priming for myself, because sometimes I feel rather blank about everything. And in this way, I can almost reinforce my views, I guess. It's kind of strange to have myself reinforcing my own views. And over the years, I've done some research on the topic, and I've done quite a bit of writing. And I find writing difficult because it's very linear. It's got to be polished. And I just said it's got to be, and I don't even think that's a real sentence. Yet I can get away with saying it because it's a conversation. And I like that conversational aspect. And really I just want to talk about looking at mental health differently. And I have a diagnosis of bipolar 1, and I really feel that I can still utilize my diagnosis and at the same time talk about increased and ever expanding ways to talk about experiences that I have had based on having this diagnosis and as a result of it. So I feel like what I want to talk about is just expanding and elaborating on my diagnosis and my subjective experience. And there's usually not much of an opportunity to do that. So by making videos, I have that opportunity. And another thing I want to do perhaps is translate some of the things that I've written into video, because again, a lot of my writing isn't polished and it's sort of separate ideas, and I don't know if I really have anything to write that's polished, that's like a perfect message of some kind. My main message is, who wants to think and feel and see mental health differently and talk about it differently and share about it differently. It's not, oh, this is how you should think about it, or this is how you should share. It's, where's the sharing beyond just, this is my recovery story, and this is how I recovered, and these were my symptoms, and this is what I'm doing now to feel better. What about the inner subjective experience of it, and really inviting conversation about it, and making it as normal as talking about the dream you had last night? And, maybe it's a long dream, maybe it went on for 30 days, but it's still an experience. And a lot of it is very harrowing tales. And so just inviting conversation and talking about it, and again, I feel I can say, yes, I have a brain disease, if that's what you want to say I have. You can't prove it by any test, and I can't prove it by my experience that it's actually true, but some authority figure is telling me that it's true, so I'll say, okay, sure. But I still have some great stories to tell, and I still have more to share about it than just that one little snippet of explanation. Sure, that's a great explanation, but that doesn't mean that I don't have anything else to share about it. And I feel like talking about it more will invite a different way of looking at it. And that doesn't mean that it's to the exclusion of that brain disease model. There's a lot of people out there that want to have nothing to do with the brain disease model, and maybe one day I'll be one of them. I have been mostly helped by the system. I have had some bad experiences with it too, and I'm still within the system. And I feel like perhaps one day I will be able to transcend the system, but not by doing as much as I can to invite conversation about the transcendence of the system. So if I make the leap out of the system, it will happen hopefully organically, and I'll still say thank you for all the help that you've given me, system. It's unfortunate that so many people have so many bad experiences with the system, and that's something that I hope will really change. And maybe by really talking about our experiences and sharing what it's really like and sharing what it really means for us who go through it, the system will be able to make changes to better provide care. And if they don't, well, maybe we can work towards something together to help each other, for those who can. And maybe helping each other is just having conversation about some of these ways of looking at it, because perhaps we've never been invited to have a conversation. There's a lot of campaigns about don't hide and speak up about your mental illness, but it's all don't hide the story that we've given you, or speak up about the story we've given you, which is your mental illness. What about speak up about the stories you have that you've never been invited to share, that you were always too afraid to share, that you basically were silenced from ever assuming they had any relevance or meaning to your life? A lot of people talk about how it's a spiritual experience, and then they just are never invited to talk about that. But the system isn't equipped to talk about that. But maybe we can talk about that with each other, because a lot of people that do get themselves out of the system end up turning around and putting a lot of energy into being mad at the system and fighting the system and bashing the system. And that's not, in my view, that's not going to invite collaboration. I feel the system is a bunch of human beings that are mostly caring people, that given the right, given something, I don't know what, will start to listen. But they're less likely to listen to angry bashing, and they're more likely to listen to heartfelt stories of experience and people just opening up with what it's really like, and sharing what helps and sharing what doesn't help. They're people just like us. And we can help them understand. At least I feel that way. And we can help change it for people that will experience it in the future, even if we weren't so lucky to escape it and not have to go through it. You know, people 20 years ago went through it way worse than I have in the last 5 years. And hopefully people 20 years from now will go through it way easier than I did in the last 5 years. And it's possible. Anything's possible. So just conversation. The system is not perfect. It has some great things, and it has some not so great things. And I think the biggest detrimental thing is the story that we're given, that it is a brain disease and here's your treatment and here's your diagnosis. And that invites self-stigma, that invites so many things. And then they say recover from what we just told you, when they never took the time to listen to where a person was at when they first were experiencing the mental health system. So they talk more so nowadays about person-centeredness, and I feel like one day the person-centeredness will extend not just to, the person directs some of their recovery and treatment plan and things. It will also be person-centered in that the person decides what's going on for them. The person decides the story. There's no paternalism even in terms of the story that's given as to what is going on. And I don't know how that'll happen, but even if it can happen for a person personally, subjectively, there's still value. Even if the system never changes that way, but there is an understanding that a person can decide their own experience inside of what happened, because maybe there's someone to talk to about it, so they're able to make meaning about it. Maybe the diagnosis would be one thing, but the meaning of the experience would be something altogether different. All the people with the diagnosis of bipolar disorder do not or did not have the same experiences internally, subjectively, and make meaning out of all the things that happen in a different way. But there's a lot of similarities. What I'm saying is there's meaning beyond just the diagnosis. Just as a person with cancer might completely change their life because they realize there's different meanings in life. From my experience, I felt different meanings in life because of my experience. So same thing, both are diseases, but there's still meaning that people make out of things. And that's the part to me that is missing. And it's one thing for the meaning, but it's also how does that affect and impact one's life going forward. So to dismiss everything as a brain disease, I think there's so much missed in terms of the meaning of the experience of what can be incorporated into somebody's life from the information, from the experience. And that's something that is not taken into account. And another reason to make videos is I want to be able to embody the conversation I want to have. So I don't want to spend so much time writing and then it just sort of gets lost in a file in my computer. And then when the time comes to utilize it in some way, it's just a piece of writing and then it goes into whatever or doesn't. And then it's not something I've ever really talked about in a really long time. So by talking about things and by translating some of the writing I've done and research into video, it's a way to actually have that conversation with myself and embody having those conversations that I want to invite other people to have too. So if I was thinking, oh, embody this conversation, and then I spent the next 10 years writing a book, for example, I wouldn't be embodying the conversation. I'd be writing a book about embodying the conversation, and then it would be 10 years wasted not embodying the conversation, and I don't see the point of that. And a good thing about video too is then I can have the conversation, if I do put it out there, with a lot of different people at the same time, and I don't actually have to be there. And another thing too is, for people like me with a diagnosis, there was a period of time over-medicated or just not able to concentrate because of medications. So videos are a bit easier to follow. I have read some great books on some of the themes that I want to talk about, but they're like big, long, thick books. And it was a period of time when I was able to concentrate and focus and read them. But, you know, first of all, somebody has to find that book. They have to be interested in it, and then they have to be able to read it. And that could be difficult. So I feel like just having conversations about ideas and inviting more conversation, as people like me can just have conversation. We don't need to write books and things back and forth and really convince each other of our ideas, because at least in my experience, there's not really any convincing necessary. And that's the thing too about writing versus video, is that I'm not trying to like carefully craft some kind of convincing message. I'm just trying to invite conversation, and I just am interested in conversation and sharing and wondering about what other people think about actually ascribing meaning to some of the experiences. Not in order to get stuck in those experiences and be like, well, I need to have that again, or, you know, oh, that defines the rest of my life, or, oh, it was such a great feeling, I need that back. No, just to make meaning about it and to be able to move on even from it by making meaning. So just inviting conversation. And again, I'm not trying to like carefully craft some convincing message, because from what I've experienced, even in reading those great books that I read, it all really resonated with me. And that's the thing. I'm not sure if this is true for you, but a lot of it just resonates. It's just conversation. And if you see it, if you see eye to eye, or you have some level of understanding of that experience and that state, it kind of makes sense. It's not to convince anybody. So if a person watches this and they've gone through some kind of altered state, a lot of what I say might just really resonate, and you might just understand. Not in that you had the exact same experience, but it's like, you know, describing somewhere where you've been and somebody else has been there, and they can understand what you're describing, just because you've both been there. And then if somebody watches this and they haven't been there, maybe it'll seem like, oh, I'm trying to convince you of something, but I'm not really. I'm just talking about my experience of somewhere that maybe you've never been. So, you know, you might be able to kind of picture what I'm saying or understand, but maybe it's not going to resonate in the same way. But maybe you know somebody that, or you're caring for somebody that has been through these states of experience, and perhaps it'll help with understanding some of what it's like, or invite you to think about it in different ways, which, if you're able to think about it and see it in different ways, might actually change the person you're helping's response to you, because you're at least attempting to see what they're saying, or you're at least interested in hearing about what they might want to share about it, which is something that maybe they've never been invited to do before. And just to approach it with curiosity, because I'm curious about it myself. Like, I've been there, I've been in, psychosis, as they call it, 4 times, and I don't think it's anything that I'm ever going to figure out. I don't think it's something that I'm going to be able to say, this is what it is. Whether it's a disease of the brain, sure, okay, that doesn't explain everything. Sure, if you want to say it's a disease of the brain, fine, but there's still a lot more to it. Just like you can say to someone, well, it's cancer. Well, there's a lot more to it than it's cancer. There's physiological processes, there's environmental factors, there's genetics, there's so many things. So just like the biological brain disease of psychosis, if you want to say it's that, that's fine, I can say it's that, but that still doesn't explain everything. Obviously there's psychosocial factors. Why else would they have psychosocial rehab? There's psychobiosocial, spiritual, ethno, eco, factors. There's so many different factors. So it's not something that I'm trying to figure out. It's more something that I'm very curious about, and I'm also curious about the meaning of it, and I feel like there's a lot more to be said about the meaning of it than the cause of it or the explanation of it. And there can be a lot of value harvested from it, I feel, if it was looked at that way. And it is difficult to look at it that way because there's a lot of terrible elements of it. But there's a lot of terrible elements to most things, like diseases or processes. It's, even something as simple, not simple, but even something like going through university is hard. It's a struggle. It's a learning experience. It's, it's draining, it's tiring, but it's a learning process. And then it's the same with something like psychosis. It's like going to inner university, like the university of one's interior self. And it's not just one's own personal interior self, it's the collective unconscious and the collective interior self that we all share, that we have in common, that we need to have in common. And that's how we can empathize with each other, is because we all share that. That's what empathy is. It's that shared experience. Otherwise, if we all had completely different experiences, we'd have nothing shared and nothing that we would be able to see eye to eye about. And I feel that people that have gone through these experiences can resonate with conversation about it. And I feel like the conversation would be rather easy and effortless, in that it's just like talking about any other common human experience. And maybe not every human experiences this particular thing, but a good percentage of people do. And, just like 2 people that went through cancer treatment might talk about that. 2 people that went through psychosis and the system can talk about their inner experiences in order to share and make meaning and validate and say, you're not alone. Say, hey, I felt that too. Whoa, I'm not an alien. That's something similar happened to me. And a lot of that can help with the stigma, because so many of us accept the stigmatizing story of biological brain disease and then isolate. And by isolating, we're self-stigmatizing. And by self-stigmatizing, we isolate. So we're not talking to each other. We're not telling each other it's okay that it happened. It's okay that you felt like you were going to kill your mother. You didn't. People kill their mother in their dreams. They didn't do it. It's just thought. It's just material. Sane people think about killing somebody. And, they don't have the same terror associated with it because it's just a thought, but I shouldn't use that example of the killing people one because whatever. So again, it's just conversation. I'm not trying to convince anybody of anything. I'm not convinced myself. I have no idea. It's one of those things that's a mystery. And it's just like talking about something mysterious. It's a mysterious phenomena, and again, I'll never figure it out. I'm not trying to figure it out. I feel like by having conversation, it'll create sort of a network of almost protection in a way, because people will start to understand it or reinforce their understanding, and which the understanding might just be, I can't understand, but this is what I feel it meant, and I don't get it. Why does this happen? Or this is what happened to me, or this is what I experienced. And I feel like by creating these conversations, we'll be able to create a sort of relational mind. So Dr. Dan Siegel talks about the embodied mind and the relational mind, and how so much of our minds, not our brains, but our minds, which is different than the brain, we're all enmeshed in each other. And if we have our own little understanding of what happened with us and we don't share, we're not creating it in an interpersonal neurobiological network. And that's just by having conversation. And that would actually be reflected in the structure of our brains, in that we're having a conversation about this and somebody else is having a conversation back, and we're all talking about it. So it's in our brains. And in that way, it would start to spread amongst common society, and maybe people that haven't even experienced it will start to understand some of the experiences that happen. And that would almost maybe protect them from, if it did happen, from being so afraid of it, because there can be a lot of scary parts of it. But I think it's really time to have these conversations. Not just conversations about how much the system sucks, not just conversations about how much we hate the pharmaceutical companies and how much damage they've done, and they've done damage. But if we're just talking about that, we're not doing our part to say how it is, to say what it feels like, to say what it's like for us subjectively, to say how we want it interpreted, to say how we interpret it, and to say that with each other. How else is anyone going to see anything differently? If we just say we don't want the drugs, but we don't say what we want or how it is, or start talking about things, so other ideas about what might work and what might be better start to actually spring from the conversation of what it's like. Not just saying what we don't like and what we don't want. That there's alternatives, but by having more and more conversation, the modalities or the things that might help will come into play that suit and fit the conversation. So if it's just let's fight the system, then we're just going to be fighting the system. And I personally don't want to fight the system. The system still might get the best of me. I don't know. I'm not through it. And it's still, there, scaring me in the background. But I think fighting the system isn't going to help us transcend the system. We have to create the new paradigm and let the system die off when it's time. You know, some people really like the system. And the system is there. The system is necessary. If it wasn't, it wouldn't exist. It's completely necessary and it exists, and that's why it exists. We have to make it not necessary. We have to make it so we don't need that. We have to make it so we can say, no thank you, I have somewhere else. I choose this other option. The system's not going to do that for us. But we need to start talking to each other, and we need to have different conversations, and not just about the system, but just about ourselves and what it is to be human. You know, they talk a lot nowadays about our genetics. You know, even now the genetics of mental illness, they have psychiatric genetic counseling. You think about the system and how wasteful it is, and of all the things they could create as the next thing to help people, they create psychiatric genetic counseling. Like, what is that? How ridiculous. I'm curious about what they actually say. Like, they don't test your genetics. They just, I don't know, do a family tree and say, ooh, you're susceptible because your aunt's cousin, twice removed cat, had psychosis. I'm not sure what they say. I shouldn't totally make fun of it. My point is that that's the next field of study of all the things that are even already out there. They just always need to create more medical, pseudo-medical stuff. Like, if it wasn't already pseudo-medical enough in so many people's minds, they got to go create, you know, I don't know, a family tree analyst, and like actually make that a position. But anyways, I might remove that rant, because just after I said don't complain about the system and fight about the system, I start yapping about something in the system. But basically, we are worried about genetics in general, but what we need to really be worried about is memetics, memes, which are thoughts or bits of information or words. And in my experience of psychosis, it's memes out of control, thoughts out of control, thinking, and then that thought leads to that thought and the next thought, and then 10 thoughts from there at the same time, and it's overload, and it's words. All those things are like recorded in my brain as words and thoughts, and they're all memes. So it's more important to protect ourselves from the memes, and one of the memes is the stigma story of mental illness. And it's okay to say, yes, I have a mental illness, or to keep that as a piece of information, but don't actually let it get encoded in your brain. It's a nice tool to have a diagnosis, but it's not actually you. It's not something that should actually infect your brain cells and infect your being. So be careful of those memes.